Welcome. Today I'm joined by Bob Stewart, who is the medical lead for the England men's team. Bob, how are you?
Yeah, very good, Andy. Nice to be here. It's been probably too long trying to get organised by by both of us. So it's
Yeah,
nice to finally get a time we can both make it.
exactly. Well, yeah, we actually met in person before actually trying to. It's kind of a bit random how
Bit
we
back to
got
front.
that done before actually getting a Teams call in. So
I know.
anyway, that is the nature of things. And I'm interested actually on that point. Like, how do you cope with it? You're like, you do stuff with the Lions, with England. You've got so many roles, and like with accessibility to WhatsApp, email, social media, things like that. How do you manage all of that stuff?
Um, I mean, to be honest, like you've got so. I mean, like WhatsApp's like the never-ending gift, isn't it? Just everybody uses it. Coaches use it non-stop. You get hit by players, so it's a great medium. But I think for me, one thing like I need to be better at is probably not letting that replace conversations. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes you think it's easier to message because it's quick and fast if you've got to get around 10 people or a group or whatever. But I think sometimes you can lose context with certain things in a message that you don't get when you actually have a chat with people. So I tend to use that. And I've gone through phases with social media, for instance, where I'm on it and I never post anything because I never think anyone's going to be that interested in what an old fart like me's got to say. So I kind of tend to watch and look and like lots of us probably go down rabbit holes too often. And then I've gone away from it completely where I've turned it all off and ignored it all. So I kind of go through spells and variations of following people who I kind of trust and respect what they put out, and from an educational point of view to try and make myself better. So I use it a lot I use it more for that side of things, certainly the social media stuff, if and when I'm on it. And then WhatsApp, like I say, is just try to mute half your conversations you're not using probably. So yeah, when you've got quite a wide group of or quite a wide network, it's almost a job in itself, to be honest. But
Yeah,
I'm
it,
sure you're the
yeah,
same.
no, it is. No, it is. I agree. I just had like 12 unread messages just in there, and then you just like going through them all. But it's going on to your point for social media. Like I love like that John Miles and Kieran Cosgrove. I loved following them on socials throughout
Yeah,
the Lions, and I
yeah,
know the guys well, and but you kind of feel like a part of it, and you can see what's going on with it. So I love that aspect. 'Cause I know
yeah,
some people are a bit like social media adverse, whereas I really like getting an insight into
yeah,
what's happening in those things.
yeah, yeah. I think that's you know in a way I'm probably a little bit well. My kids would probably tell you I'm a bit of a dinosaur, probably, but I think I totally get that. Do you know what I mean? And it's maybe just part of the way been brought up in Scotland that putting yourself out there was never the kind of done thing to do. When were young. But I think when you look at the landscape now, even from health and fitness and all that stuff, it's completely changed, hasn't it? Do you know what I mean? From big organisations, or whether that's educational, whether it's private clinics, whether it's individual trainers or coaches and things like that, and it's an unbelievable way to grow your business. If you look at probably guys like what Altus have done, and guys like Fergal Kerrin, Al Murdoch, have kind of followed Jonas at Speedworks, things like that. Guys like that in that sort of realm have built their businesses around kind of using social media as a way to sell courses, sell mentorships, sell their coaching models and strategies, and it's if you can get it up and running, it's certainly an unbelievable tool to do that. I think if you do it the right way, and I get that. And like I said, I've used it myself, but I tend to only use it more for my own education with kind of groups like people like that and trust that they're going to put out good stuff to try and shape the way you want to practice. Do you know what I mean? Like I've got my bias about how I think the body works, so I'll tend to navigate towards those sort of things. And it doesn't mean like I close my eyes to everything else, but I think there's lots of positives to it, and probably lots of negatives. I don't know where some people get the time to post as much as they do. Do you know what I mean? Because I just don't have that time. But but fair play if you have.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. It's its own. I mean, there are roles, aren't there, just for that? Like we've got
Oh
that in
yeah,
our team where they're just doing content creation.
yeah,
It's mental
yeah.
how long it is. Like in terms of some of the people that you do are interested in watching or viewing or learning from. Like, are there any particular ones in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably over the past few years, I'd done some. Like I was trying to think back when I started with England in 2016, we had Dan Pfaff over, um, and he was with us for 2 or 3 days or something like that, and he just blew my mind, to be honest. Do you know what I mean? He was operating at a different level to, you kind of think you're working in high performance, or you think you're a high performance coach, and then you listen to him and you're like, oh my God, I'm miles off it. Um, so he kind of piqued my interest in kind of like speed and a bit more other things. He was across everything as a coach. Um, so that kind of got me into following Altus. So I've done quite a bit of their stuff, and then I did a mentorship with Dan with Tom Tombleson before the World Cup in 23. I think we did that in 2022, and that was great. So they're definitely anything that they put out, I'm kind of interested in. Stuart Millen's a big part of that as well. Who's got a really nice philosophical side to everything, and a real nice mix of art and science, which I really like. I'm not a great numbers man. I definitely like a bit of art now and again, so that kind of floats my boat. And then anything sort of biomechanics related. I used a lot of the Conor Harris stuff before. Which is good. And again, like just individuals, guys like Al Murdoch and Jonas are guys that have worked kind of top end in sport for a long time across different sports as well. So they've got a lot of good experiences to share, and very well. I think they apply what they do really, really well. Fergal, the Sportsmith, the stuff Rob Pacey's done with Sportsmith's unbelievable resource now. Do you know what I mean? What he's created. So, there's a lot of good stuff out there, but I think what I've tried to do is, like I say, build my own philosophy over the years of how I think your body works and what it needs to get from point A when you're injured to back to playing. And then I just try and bolt on things to that philosophy that I've got. And then if they work, great, I'll hold on to it. If they maybe don't work the way I want or the way they think, I'll get rid of it. And just so got that's kind of how I've tried to use kind of whether that's my own CPD or social media to try and help me improve as a practitioner really over the last number of years really.
Yeah, I know. Like, how often just do things you get things wrong in this stuff? Because I think you do. I think it's like for you, like when we had that round table, what I thought was really quite nice was that everyone was really open and that
Yeah,
people can talk about. So actually, yeah,
yeah,
everyone's learning all the time on things. But sometimes you do go to an event and it's this is why we're good. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's more
yeah,
talking about how good things are.
yeah. I think like over the years, geez, got a lot of things wrong, but I think the really nice thing um, about working in pro sport is that generally, I mean, I don't have this luxury now because we've only really got the players in blocks of camps. But when you're in a club, you're working with players every day, and I think it gives you a really great opportunity to kind of play around and try things. You know what I mean? And excuse me, like 10, 15 years ago, it was like one shoe fits all. We're going to get everybody to do this, and I think over the years, everybody's now realizing that. Um, you kind of even if you're in a team sport, they all play different positions. They've all got different injury histories. They've all got different social backgrounds. They've all got different emotional states and pressures and things like that. So you are definitely treating an individual, and you can have two guys that present exactly the same, and you do one thing with one and it works like a charm, and you think, oh great, I'll use it on that guy, and it doesn't work at all. So, but I think that's a really nice thing about pro sport and being in that environment is you've got the opportunity to kind of experiment a bit and trial things and take things that you see or you learn from other people and see how they fit into your group. And I think there's probably not many jobs that have got that, that kind of the ability to, or that kind of nuance where you can play around and experiment and see what works for you. But also, I'm a great believer now in trying to get the players to take way more ownership of what things feel like to them and what works for them, because traditionally I think it's always been, I'm a physio, I'll tell you what to do. And I think some of the older players are still a bit like that, whereas you're trying to get them to be more aware of what you're doing for them and how it impacts them. You know what I mean? And if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work, tell me it doesn't work, rather than just doing it because I'm telling you to do it and you trust me. It's got to make, everything we give you has to make a difference. And if it doesn't, you're wasting our time, or you're wasting your time. So that feedback, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, like how, like, in terms of players then that you work with then and giving that feedback, are they all direct with you on that? How does that vary player to player?
Yeah, I think like you said, it's funny, isn't it? Some of you get some players that they'll just tell you, no, does nothing, or no, it's not changed, and you're like, right, okay, and you just got to kind of recalibrate and try and work out why is that. But I think quite a few of them now quite like when it's almost like talking through it as you go. So all right, that's not worked. So why is not? Maybe it's because of that. So let's try this. And then they're like, yeah, right, that's different, or I'll go there instead of here. And I think, quite a lot of them get quite active with that. Others are a little bit cagey because they're a bit like, well, you're 30 years older than me and you know what you're doing, and I'm a young pup and I don't feel I can tell you because it's like telling my dad that he's wrong, sort of thing. And I think it's just trying to make them, one, obviously trust you that you want that feedback, that them telling you what they think and what they feel is not going to be a negative. It's not being frowned upon. It's not that you can't say it because, um, yes, they want to know what you think and what you know, but they've also got to play a really active part themselves in getting themselves back to the level they need to be at. And I think that's just like growing as an athlete and a person. It's probably pretty hard when you're 20 coming into an international environment for the first time. And you've got all these different people, different pressures, different mindset, and then you've got people asking you, everybody's asking you questions. Everybody's, what's about this? What are you going to do there? What are you going to do for this? And there's a lot going on. And I think for some of the younger guys, it's quite hard to navigate that initially. But that's kind of our job as staff, to make them feel comfortable and trusted that what they think and what they feel is valued. And I think that's where we're kind of, we're trying to get to, certainly from a medical point of view, which is only going to help them, with everything else, help them develop to, or help them get to where they want to get to as well. So.
Mm. And like for you as a practitioner, then, like how have you changed your approach to how you give them options, or like have you matured and changed in that sense from when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, massively. I mean, I think when I first, I mean, I think in a way, um, probably like a lot of us, you still kind of get a little bit of the imposter syndrome. You know what I mean? Where you're thinking, am I good enough to be doing this? Am I, this and that? And I think that's, if I have moments like that, I kind of sit and look back, and if I think, where I was at the start, you kind of were very much like, the players just wanted to be told what to do, basically, and you drove that. And then I think as I've got older, when I first started, most of the players I was working with were the same age as me. So it was really easy to kind of connect because you had a lot of common themes. You're all the same age, doing the same things. Socially, I still played rugby, so you had that kind of, it was really easy to connect. Whereas now, most of the boys are the same age as my kids, or just a bit older than my kids, and like I think my kids would like to think that I've connected all right with them, but it's still a big challenge. The environment that they've grown up in is very different, um, to the one that I did, and I'm now trying to connect with boys, like I said, who are just different age, different era. And I think you know, I think I spend more time probably trying to get them to understand what's going on. And like I said earlier, about how I need to know what they feel and, what's worked for them, what's improved, what hasn't, what needs to change, where do they need to get to. And also use no matter what age they are, use their experiences of what they need to be able to do in training and playing. Because like I know rugby relatively well, but I've never packed down in an international scrum in a front row. So I'm like, well, I don't know what that feels like. So how we recreate those scenarios in, rehab and training is massive, and if it's not doing what it needs to be doing, then I need to hear that from them, because then it's not realistic and you're not preparing them to get back to what they do. So I think I've just tried to be really more and more open about how valuable their opinion and insight is to what, where they need to get to from a functional point of view. Um, and just got a better understanding and a better feel for how important, like, the kind of emotional and cognitive stress that they're under, certainly in international camps, and how that impacts their bodies. Do you know what I mean? And their physical state. And it's been a real eye opener, probably more so in the last, I would say 8 to 10 years. That's probably been way more prevalent than I would ever have thought it was. And I've just tried to upskill myself in those areas, working with sports psychologists that we've used, and just some other reading and CPD stuff, and just try to kind of filter that to you know, make my life and their lives easier in terms of achieving what they want to get to and stuff. So yeah, so that's probably where I've gone with it, I think.
Yeah, no, no, it's interesting. I think it has changed a lot in terms of
Yeah,
athletes and more access to knowledge in social
yeah,
media,
100%.
all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, and I can imagine it would have been like for you. You've spent the vast majority of your career in rugby. Like just
yeah.
going back to where it all started for you. Like where are you from, and like what started your journey into sports medicine?
Um, yeah, so I mean, to be honest, that like I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do. Like I thought I was going to go and be a PE teacher when I was like at secondary school, and then my next door neighbour's daughter was a PE teacher, and she said, "Whatever you do, don't go into teaching." So that kind of blew my legs off fairly early. But yeah, no, went and looked around a load of open days, and all my mates were going to engineering and other things and business, and I walked around there and I thought, this is horrendous. I can't go to uni and do this. And then stumbled across physio, where I mean I'd done biology as one of my hires, but stumbled across physio, and just like it was actually the anatomy wall charts and other things that kind of piqued my interest, and I was just like, oh, this looks pretty cool. I'll apply for that, and was lucky enough to get in. So I went through my uh, honours degree at, well, it's Glasgow Caledonian. It was back when the inception, when it first started, and that was like a 4 year course. Did that, came out and worked in the NHS for a couple of years, which was great. And then I ended up going to New Zealand to play rugby mainly. And then my dad was a bit like, you need to get a job out there. And I was like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Physio won't change that much in 6 months. And he was like, well, you're not going. I'm not giving you any money to go unless you get a job. So I worked in a kind of what was a sports medicine clinic out there for about 8 months, and then came back to Scotland. Ended up working the NHS for about another 6 or 8 months, and then there was a job came up um, with the Scottish Rugby Union, and it was kind of one of them where I thought, like, I'm not probably experienced enough. It was like a rehab role stuck between Edinburgh and Glasgow at the time, and I just didn't think I was quite ready for that. So I just got in touch with the Glasgow team doctor at the time and just said, look, is there any age group stuff, or is there any way to come in and kind of like, just to get a foot in the door, like make the tea, or just strap or do anything really just to help out. Um, and then I got a message back from him saying that their physio was leaving to go back to football. Would you be interested in an interview? And I was like, yeah, all right. And turned up, got interviewed for a job with the Glasgow Warriors, or Glasgow Caledonian as it was at the time, and was lucky enough to get that. And that was back in '98. Um, so then did that, managed to get in and do a bit of stuff with Scotland from 2000, and then stayed in that role to 2006 and moved down to Worcester, where I still live now actually, to Worcester Warriors. So a year there, and then ended up leaving there and going to Gloucester for 9 years.
Yeah, so like just go back to that time.
Yeah,
There's a couple of things there. So for
yeah,
firstly, the New Zealand thing, like that
yeah,
must be an amazing experience to go to.
yeah,
Like it's kind of seen as the centre of rugby
yeah.
and that bit, and then be working. So what was that experience like?
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, like I'd be the first one to admit I was probably a bit of a homeboy. So for me, just at a personal level, it was just the first time kind of getting away and doing your own thing, and it was great. I was really well looked after. When I went out there, lived with a great family for about 3 months, and then with a bunch of boys for the kind of the second part of it. But the great thing out there was they just always feel over here we kind of like um, live to work, if that makes sense, whereas they work to live. So it's just like kind of different mindset around the lifestyle and stuff. But you worked hard Monday to Friday, um, and that, like I said, it was mainly a sports medicine clinic that I worked in. So again, just saw loads of different sports, just got exposed to so much. Um, I'm not sure I was doing them any good or not, but it was great for me. But it was great, like just really busy, hands-on, physical work, but definitely made me grow as a person, as a clinician. Like I could handle patient numbers, more pressure, dealing with different people, different sports. Just made you think on your feet a lot more. And then obviously fending for yourself when you didn't have any sort of family and stuff out there, which was cool. But yeah, yeah, I would definitely recommend it to anyone. If you've got the opportunity where you do with something like physio, you can go somewhere else and work. You can get registered, work in different countries, and get different experience. And I think anything like that's worth doing. You
Yeah.
know, I don't. I think it definitely teed me up when I came home. Like I think if I hadn't done that, I'd have probably. I'm not sure I'd ever go to the NHS, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? I might have, but I think I'd have just stayed where I was, worked your way up through that. And don't get me wrong, those elements of, like, I really enjoyed my time working in the NHS, worked with a great bunch of people, but things like, stroke rehab, for instance, like I absolutely loved that. It was so challenging. A bit like, it's probably in my head as close to kind of musculoskeletal medicine as you can get, like from a physio point of view. It's just like, trying to work out how they're compensating, what's going on, how have they changed. If I do that with them, what does that do? What stimulus does that create? It just, for me, I really love the challenge of working in that environment as well. And if I hadn't gone down this route, probably more because of what I did in New Zealand, that took me down this path, I would have definitely probably gone down that route. And some of the people that work in that domain are unbelievable. The staff that work, the quality of people that work in there, their knowledge and their skill sets are second to none, really. I think that.
Mm. Yeah, no, and then so when you went into the into Scottish rugby, then you said you felt like I'm not experienced enough for this. And then
Yeah,
once you got in there, like what was that accurate? Like what did you feel? Like what was the learning curve like?
yeah. I think it was a bit bonkers when you look at it now, because when I started with Glasgow, I was on my own looking after 50 people, 50 players in a changing room with no heating. I think I had a portable ultrasound unit, a bag of tape, and a wobble board, and that was probably about it. And it's actually quite bonkers when you think about it, because you still got people, by sticking to like really basic principles, you still got people fit. You still got them. You still had access to gym and all that, but it just, you look at what you've got at your disposal now. So I mean, compared to what you had then, and it's so far apart. Um, but it was just, yeah. I mean, I did think at the time, am I ready for this? And then you get hit with something like that, and you're like, oh my God! But you got to find your feet quick. Um, and like I said, the whole group were really, really accommodating when I first started, and I think because I was the same age as most of the players, I was still playing rugby at a decent enough level, not quite that level, but decent enough that it gave you a kind of a little bit of a level of credibility with the lads. Like I knew a few of them anyway, so you kind of it made the stepping stone into that environment a lot easier, and I think once you kind of found your feet and got going, and I think it's just basic things, isn't it? Like, you know, I was just always brought up to work hard. Do you know what I mean? I maybe still don't work smart, but like, do you know what I mean? I will work hard and I'll do my best and try my best. And I think if you do that, people understand and they see that and they appreciate it, that you're trying your best. And then gradually as you build up, that job allowed me to build up a real level of experience, especially when you're working on your own, because you don't really have too many people to sense check stuff with. You've really, sometimes you're flying by the seat of your pants a little bit, but you learn pretty quick what you can push and what you can't, and things like that. And just, communicate with coaches, all of this stuff. You kind of doing that day to day because it's just you. You're not filtering information into someone else. So yeah, it was a pretty steep learning curve, but I think that gave me the opportunity, by being like that for the first couple of years, gave me a chance to work with the Scotland national team, I think, by just being like fairly consistent from that point of view, making good relationships with staff and players, So I think those sort of little, sounds really simple and really basic, but I think if you do those things well and you've got those kind of attributes, then that at least sort of gives you a base to kind of kick on and push on from.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. You can only do what you can do, and
Yeah.
you're doing what you can in that bit. And that just as a question from that instance there, where you've got 50 people, you got the wobble board, ultrasound, and some tape, compared to what you do now. Like in terms of enjoyment level for you, like what do you ever look back and think, God, I wish I like that simplicity of things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think now, I mean, I'd imagine like there'll be people working in, you know, pro sport everywhere with massive teams, whether that's performance teams or medical teams or whatever. But I think at the moment now, even we've got kind of part-time doctor, three full-time physios, three full-time S&Cs, and a full-time sports scientist with England. And we're only in camp all this, like kind of 3 blocks a year. And you think, you're managing all these people, you've got all everybody's opinions, it takes a lot more managing, a lot more effort um, than it did back then. And that doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. It's just the level of care that's now provided to most professional athletes is just kind of growing arms and legs over the last sort of 20 years, hasn't it? And I'm not, and that's, I think certainly at the top level, that's needed. Do you know what I mean? If you look at what the physical demands and the emotional demands of performing at a high level all the time for these kids is definitely a lot harder, I think, than it was from a rugby point of view. Definitely a lot harder physically and mentally than it was maybe 20 years ago. And I think the depth of support and support staff reflects that, and coaching as well. The coaching staffs have got bigger because that's what the game's sort of demanded. Um, but I do sometimes look back and kind of just like reflect on those early days. It just makes you laugh. Do you know what I mean? Like I said, you'd think now, if you tell people that now, they're like, what? They just they can't compute it, and yet you know, like I loved it, and I definitely now my job's become probably way less clinical than I would like, and a bit more admin management based. Um, and like days like that, back then all I had to do was treat players, rehab players, get them fit, go to the games, strap tape, and then it was just like repeat, rinse. It's like, and like yeah, I loved that, absolutely loved it. But again, I think you get to a point where, like I did, it was probably the first 8 years of my career in Scotland was very much like that, where it was all just clinic based rehab games, week in, week out. But then you kind of get to a point where where I got to a point where I knew my career wasn't really going to progress if I stayed in the structure that I was currently in, and that's why I looked at moving down to, we ended up moving down to Worcester. So, and that was to take a head of medical job in a club, just where you had a bit more responsibility. So still at the clinical stuff, but you were just having to manage people and look at a bit more strategically at how to run a department, how to develop a department, develop systems, work more with other teams and integrate from that point of view. And that was just, I just got to the end of that time in Scotland and felt I needed another challenge, really.
How did you find those extra responsibilities?
I think it's quite funny. I've talked to a few people about this, probably, is that you end up, I can't remember, there's a name for it, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But you end up being a really good physio or really good at one thing, and then people automatically kind of think, well, you're really good at that, so that means you're going to be a really good head of department. And like for me, I've got no training like in management or managing teams or managerial or leadership, at the time. And you get lobbed into this, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, what do I do here? Scenarios come up, and you're like, I've got no idea how to deal with this. But again, a bit like you did it, like I said at the start, you kind of just got to learn and think on your feet, and be explicit when you need to be, communicate well. And I think that's the kind of challenge, really, isn't it? So I think it's like I've definitely found that side of it harder, probably, than the clinical side and developing that. And I think I'm still not 100% sure I've got it nailed. I've been doing it for a few years now, but I think I'm aware of that. Do you know what I mean? I know where my weak spots are and things that I need to get better at, and I've endeavoured to do that kind of consistently. And I think if you can do that, put your hand up and say, I got that wrong, or I haven't got that right, or I could have done that better, and then you can back that up by doing that or changing, then people know that you're trying to do the right thing the right way. And that's kind of ultimately how I've tried to operate, like, from certainly from when I've moved down here. You're still not going to get it right. You're still going to make mistakes. But they're the things you learn from generally, don't you? You don't, if everything goes well all the time,
Yeah.
sometimes you need a kick to kind of bring you back down to earth and sort yourself out of it, don't you?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Like I'm intrigued into, like, when you go into interviews, there's always tends to be a classic question of, right, well, what your weakness is. And so
Yeah.
when, presuming you have been asked that in the various roles that you've been to, how honest are you with those things that you've said? Are you aware of what your weaknesses are?
Um, yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? I think I'd have said certainly in the earlier days when I went for interviews, I probably, like a lot of people, probably got dragged into saying what you thought they wanted to hear. Do you know what I mean? And I think latterly, like I mean, I haven't had, certainly the last couple of interviews I've generally gone in and just said, right, this is me, this is what I'm about, this is how I work, this is what I think, and being upfront, like you say, around what you think you're good at, what you think you can get better at, things like that, and effectively gone in and gone, like, this is who I am. If this is what you want, great, give me a job. If it's not what you want, then that's fine. And I think there's probably just excuse me, like a relative of getting to a level where you're comfortable being who you are and what you can offer. but also accepting that that's not what everyone wants. And I think that for me is probably just you get to like a level of experience and probably maturity that I wouldn't have had in my earlier days, where you're kind of like thinking, "Oh, I really want this job. I've got to get it," and they're like, "Well, that's fine. Yeah, you be if you didn't. The reason you're applying for it is because you want it, but at the same time, if you don't get it, it's not the be all and end all. You know, I think if you're in a, you know, there's always going to be reasons why you maybe want to leave somewhere, whether that's just, you know, and I've never like really left somewhere because I've had enough. Do you know what I mean? I've been lucky enough to either be offered a job that I've seen as a step up, or a job's come along that I think that'll allow me to progress, or I want to work with those people. You know, so I think if you always look at it like that, yes, you want to go and work there, but I think, you know, you're going to get the odd kick in the teeth or knock back and things like that. And I think that's where being able to accept that you are what you are, you can offer what you can offer, and then not lose any sleep over it if that's not what they want. And then just, you know, look for other things. So that's how I've tried to kind of approach it latterly, but I definitely didn't do that at the start.
Yeah, no, it is funny though, isn't it? Because it's actually so much more appealing if someone comes in and it says that, like, just this is what I'm actually, I don't like that, I don't want to do that. It's like,
Yeah,
well, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I
yeah,
don't, I don't blame you in a lot of instances, but so many times, and again, I'd be definitely be the same as you, is that you say, oh no, I can learn, or how do. It's like actually, I have no interest in doing that bit, or I'm not
yeah,
good at doing that bit, and it's
yeah,
actually much more appealing probably for the, unless they desperately need that aspect, but they probably won't anyway.
yeah, yeah. I think that's it. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like being comfortable, like people would say, in your own skin and things like that's, you know, a big part of, you know, getting better and making yourself better. Like I got, you know, I think it's funny, like I went through probably a block in the middle of my career where it was difficult getting time to go and do CPD, but I kind of got to a point where there was a block where I just thought I stopped and I went, you know, I haven't really developed myself. Like I've developed other people and other staff, but I haven't changed what I've done or how I work in the last 4 or 5 years or whatever it was. And when I started with England, like Eddie Jones just wrote like my first review. He just gave me a bit of paper and opened up, and it just said, "You're good, but keep improving your craft." And that was it. And that was the kind of thing for me a little bit was like, right, he's happy, but he knows I can be better. Do you know what I mean? And his challenge to me was to go and be better. And that was the one great thing about his environment in a way, was you were always pushed to challenge what you'd done in one campaign, or what, you know, whether that was like preventative work, or, you know, helping the backs prepare to run fast, or whatever it was, whatever were the key themes, you know, physically, or what he was looking for support with, was like, how can you make that better? So I'm like, right, I need to help the S&C boys underpin that. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to go and upskill. So the next time we went into camp, I had something else in my arsenal that was going to help that. And then you just kind of like kept, you know, I get into that cycle where I used my time out of camp really effectively to upskill, you know, and I was lucky enough to work with like Tom Tomlinson in that period, who was very similar from an S&C point of view. So the two of us just like bounced everything, you know, off like, what about this? What about that? Where are we going with that? What will that do? No, I think that's rubbish. You know, no, that's not going to work, or it won't work in this environment. You know, things like that. So I think having the ability to do that, and you know, that's where these environments are great. I think, you know, you probably got way more time in an international environment, or certainly I did back then, than I would have working in a club to develop myself. And that's where I've benefited massively in the last, you know, 10 years or so, is having that capability to go and bounce, you know, go and visit other people, go and visit other sports, go and pick the brains of people who are way better at what, you know, what they do than I am, you know. And I think
Mm.
that's where using these opportunities is has been invaluable to me, certainly.
Mm. Yeah, I'm intrigued by that. So when you got that note from Eddie Jones, then, so for one, he's got a reputation as being someone that you don't want to cross, and he's like a strong character. So I'm intrigued as to how it was working with him. But like, what when you got that, like, what was your impression when you got that this piece of paper?
I think the thing is, it's fun. Like, so I had like when I got interviewed by Eddie for the job, so I got approached to see if I was interested. And basically, I don't think it lasted more than 10 minutes. Do you know what I mean? So he probably made up his mind before it, I reckon. But yeah, I spoke to him for about 10 minutes and he was like, look, shows if you want it. And I was like, right, great. So I think over the period of time, like, working with Eddie, like to start with, you'd have thought you were doing your best, you're trying this, you're trying that, we're all over everything. And then he'd just turn around at one point and be like, that's not good enough. And you're like, what? And he's like, it's not good enough. And like the thing that got me at the start was you used to probably have everybody's reaction at the start. Like, what does he mean it's not good enough? We couldn't do any better. Do you know what I mean? What's he talking about? And he get me back up. And then eventually, after this happening a couple of times, it kind of worked out that all he was doing was just trying to keep everyone on your toes. Do you know what I mean? In terms of just making sure you were on it the whole time. It wasn't anything. It was never anything personal. That's my experience of him. It was never personal. It was like keep getting better, keep trying to improve what you're doing and what you're delivering. Now and again, I'm going to give you a little clip just to make sure you don't get too comfortable, and that was kind of, you can see him. He'd be 1 week it might be the medical department that got a clip, next week it might be the S&C, then it was the coaches. And at the start, and once you realize that, like, a lot of people couldn't cope with that. And I know people will go, oh, there's a really high turnover of staff. And that's the thing, is like sometimes it's difficult not to take it personally. Sometimes it's really difficult to split personal and professional relationships. And that was something Eddie did like unbelievably. He'd be like, professional was that, personal was there. Whereas a lot of people can't dissociate the two. But once I'd kind of got that into my head with him and kind of worked out, right, I know exactly why he's doing it, but it made me want to get better. Do you know what I mean? When I worked out what he was doing and how he was doing it, it didn't make me go, oh, sort of that, I can't be bothered. Do you know what I mean? I really enjoyed that challenge, and it definitely made me pick my game up. Do you know what I mean? And made me better, definitely. Made me a better physio, better clinician, better man manager, better team player, I think, as well. Just like trying to help other people as well out through that block.
Mhm.
So no, it was really, really beneficial for me, to be fair.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Like, so for that 10-minute interview, then, so what did he ask you, or what was it?
Um, Probably just a little bit similar to what you have. So, like historically, where have I been? How did I get here? I think he asked me to give him three words that, you know, basically what was I like as a person, basically, and how would you describe yourself in three words, sort of thing. So there's a few bits like that, and then he just talked about ultimately what they needed and what they were looking for, and that was it. Like I said, it was pretty short and sharp. To be fair, the the guy that teed the interview up went, just don't worry if it doesn't last more than 10 minutes. So at least they'd been primed. But yeah, no, I mean, it was just really short, simple, to the point. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's him.
Uh,
That's him.
That's good. Do you know what? I actually use that three words one, although my wife's next door, but I think I actually used to use it more as a chat up line than just in those meetings. So I'm not sure
Don't
he
do
was
that,
using it
Clark.
for that reason, but anyway.
No, no, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because, like, again, he's like, again, very highly publicized with some of the stuff there, and it reminds me some of the stuff that Mourinho, some of the stories that I've had from Mourinho, and constantly
Yeah,
he's on you all the time, and like that's at that high level, that's why these people are very successful and
yeah,
continually get big jobs.
yeah, yeah. He was all about change. Do you know what I mean? And kind of like you going about, excuse me, like disruption. So it's all like in the build up to the 2019 World Cup, like, you'd have a schedule out for the week, and each day is mapped out in whatever detail, and then he would just flip it in his head. That Monday, schedules changed, and boys are then having to react, staff are having to react, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is mental," and in reality, it was really interesting because he did it in very different ways through that 4 year cycle. And when we got to the World Cup, um, we landed in Japan and there'd been a typhoon. We had to sit in the plane for 3 hours in the tarmac. Then we got off the plane. We're standing outside the airport waiting for the bus to turn up. And then the bus turned up for us, and I think the All Blacks got stuck as well. So the All Blacks got on our bus. It drove off. So we were waiting outside for 4 hours. So you think 7 hours in total with 33 rugby players, bunch of staff, and you're thinking, oh my god, this is going to go mad. And the boys sat there. They played cricket. They just nobody moaned. And I think that for me was the biggest reflection of all the chaos and stuff that he'd caused or created through that 4 year cycle. You get to the pinnacle of that 4 years, something like that happens, and the boys are just like, so what? Dealt
Yeah.
with it. Do you know what I mean? And you can look back at it and go, oh, it's madness. You know what I mean? But then I think, and that might not work for every team, but I think that kind of controlled chaos and change that he kind of went after definitely helped bulletproof like our playing squad, for that tournament, and he started that process like years before, 3-4 years before it. So yeah, it was really interesting how he went about it.
Mm. Yeah, no, it is interesting. And then you had that recent trip to with the Lions. So
Yeah.
we've not caught up properly since then, but it looked amazing. I've caught up with some of the other guys that were involved in it. Like, how did that come about that you get involved in that in the first place?
To be honest, I'm like really, really lucky at the time. So like I think that's I've been lucky enough to do 6 of them. So I'm definitely showing my age now. But I worked for when I was working for Scotland. James Robson was the Scotland doctor at the time, and I think it was 2005. The Clive Woodward was the head coach to New Zealand, and he asked James to head up the medical team, but he told James to pick his medical team, and then he would obviously kind of scrutinise it and see whether he agreed with it or changed it. And like I was really fortunate, and I've been eternally grateful to James for asking me to do that one in 2005. And it was always by invitation. And then I've just been lucky enough probably that from that time, I've gone to the next one. Like I think for the first block, yeah, Prav would have been 2009. So I've worked with Prav and the ones after that, and Paskey was in 2005 through to about 2017. So there's been a bit of an overlap and a bit of change now. Coming in laterally with Milesy in the last couple as well, which has been great. And like I think you're just fortunate enough you get given an opportunity or asked to do it, and then if you do a good enough job, you probably get asked back. And I think it's such a unique environment, and I think now especially given there's 8 games in 4 or 5 weeks. We had a block where you've got 5 games in 2 weeks, which for professional rugby players now is unheard of. Some of them are having to double up. Where you play Saturday and then you're on the bench on Tuesday, and they're like, "What do you mean I'm on the bench on Tuesday?" It's just there's no environment like it now in team sport anywhere. I don't think in that format, but it's great. It's like so. Great bunch of people off the field, staff and players that just rip in and kind of make the most of the experience. And it's always better when you win, which makes the last one more enjoyable. So over the years, I think out of the 6, I think we've won 2 and drawn 1 and lost 3. So it's probably it doesn't always have a happy ending, shall we say? But they're great. Like we've got so many fond memories of all of them. The people, players you've met, staff you've met and worked with, and I think you never kind of lose that bond with people that you've worked in that environment. Like you do with anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Now probably, but It's definitely unique in that respect, and I've been very, very fortunate to be given an opportunity to do it the number of times I have. So if
Mm.
somebody if I'd done one, I'd have been happy. Do you know what I mean? But it was just
Yeah.
I've been hogging it a bit, so it's probably about time I gave someone else a shot.
Yeah, don't say that. But yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. But like, in terms of like particularly memorable memories, are there any ones that you just think are absolutely epic?
uh, Through the lines or just everything in
Well,
general.
any
Um,
really.
I think, I mean, I think you kind of remember, sometimes you remember individual club games and things like that where you maybe been big underdogs and, turned up and rolled teams over. I think from an international point of view, I think the build up to the World Cup in 2019, I think the whole camp and then into the tournament itself in Japan was, I think, the first time that I'd been involved in something of that scale for that long. We started planning that from like maybe 2.5, 3 years out. And that was Eddie's way of doing it. Do you know what I mean? But I'd never been involved in a process like that. And I think when you looked at it, and obviously we fell short of the final hurdle, but beating the All Blacks in the semi-final, I don't think I've been involved in a game at that level with a team that I've been working with that have dominated a team like New Zealand the way they did that night. So I think the whole, it was a shame we didn't finish it off, but that whole experience was, rather than a one-off, that whole block I think was, I look back with, I think, with a lot of fondness and good memories with people and good times on and off the field. And then, the Lions stuff's always been pretty special. I think that winning a series is pretty. They don't happen very often. So we won the two in Australia and drawn in New Zealand was good, but I think I really enjoyed 2009 in South Africa, although we didn't win it, and that was again probably more due to just the people that were involved there. There's a lot of good fun off the field, and a lot of really really good special characters, player wise and stuff like that. It was a bit more old school back then probably, but you know, yeah, I just probably got too many good memories to. You don't have many bad ones. You lose games, of course you do, and you win games, and I think the main thing is not to lose the plot and react too badly either way. You've always got a game next week where you can get back on the horse if you've lost, or that's the good thing about sport. If you make mistakes or things go wrong, you've always got a chance to fix them. So I think that's probably the way I've always tried to look at it. But yeah, just
Mm,
yeah, no,
yeah.
not many bad memories. Well, I definitely can't remember too many bad ones. I'm sure I moaned about plenty, but
Yeah, and I think that I mean that's a good message at the end in terms of sport, but like in terms of giving advice for people looking to get into this industry or already in it even and
yeah.
experience, like what would your advice would be for people?
Um, I think the thing is, I think now it's probably like I said when I grew up, it was very much like, you know, oh geez, just get your foot in the door and go and get some experience. And I fully respect now that not many people want to do that. Maybe do it for nothing or do bits for nothing. But I'd whatever sport you want to get into, find something you love doing or a sport that you've got a great affinity to, because I think that helps. Do you know what I mean? I think like I was lucky, like I grew up playing rugby, loved rugby, and then was lucky enough to get a job in it. So it didn't really feel like a job in a way. It's more a vacation, obviously. But I think find something that you love, sport wise. If getting any experience is better than no experience, and I think how you get that, whether that's with a local club or team to start with, or be going right to prem football clubs or rugby clubs or whatever, and just try and get a foot in the door if you can. Apply for jobs that come up, get in. But I think when you get in, I think the main thing is just be curious. You know what I mean? I think my and again, this is probably my bias, is that the way sports medicine and physio is kind of traveling is you know, there's massive evidence base now that's always rumbling on, and people are going, you need to be evidence based, and I think like I fully respect that, but there's what I've certainly worked out as I've got older is there's so much more to it than that, you know, and looking after an individual player or a team, and I think, you know, being as open minded and as curious as you can is only going to make you a better practitioner, a better person, and a better team player in the environments that you want to work in. And I think that's, you know, don't be scared of asking questions. Like I've got to myself in my head is like, you know, somebody who you might trust and really respect something might say something and you go, all right, great, and you take it as gospel. But I'd always kind of, even with things, if there's any doubt, is like why. Always ask why. Do you know what I mean? Ask yourself why. And I think if you do that, you'll give yourself the best opportunity to keep evolving, you know, in the environment that you choose to work in. And if you do that, you'll enjoy it a lot more, and have a bit of fun along the way. And I think that's the main thing. I probably look like I'm miserable most of the time, to be fair, being Scottish, which is just a genetic trait. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I do still really enjoy what I do, despite how I might look sometimes.
That's not my experience of hanging out with you, so
That's
that's not
okay.
how you come
You,
across
you've
at
not been
all. And
exposed to it too often, so you've been lucky, one of the
yeah,
lucky ones.
yeah. No, look, Bob, I've really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. I really
Pleasure.
appreciate the insights, and I'm looking forward to the next round table.
Yeah, yeah,
So
me
yeah,
too.
you can get your misery out the way before that, and then you can
Definitely.
come happy again for this
That's
one.
it. 100%. Top man.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah,
Cheers.
anytime. Cheers.